Hey, baby. I'm so sorry, but the Soul investors flew in early. I have to sign now or we lose everything. Just head home. I'll make it up to you tonight.
I miss you so much, baby. I miss you so much.
She sent him a text at 6:47 in the morning. Catching an early flight. Be home by afternoon. I have a surprise for you. He replied with a single heart emoji. He had no idea she meant it. It is now 2:13 in the afternoon. And Naomi is standing at gate B24, watching her husband lift another woman off the ground. She didn't say anything. She didn't move. She just stood there, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the handle of her suitcase so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. And she watched him spin that woman in a full circle like she was a prize he had finally won. Isaac didn't see her. He never did. But someone else did. Half hidden near the pillar by the arrivals board, a man in a black high-collared suit stood completely still. He wasn't watching Isaac. He wasn't watching the mistress. He was watching Naomi. And for the first time in the 10 minutes she had been standing there, something far more dangerous than heartbreak was quietly waking up. Before we go any deeper into this story, and I promise you, it goes very deep, kindly like this video right now, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. We have viewers joining us from every continent, every time zone, every corner of this earth, and we want to know exactly where you are today. And one more thing. If you have ever stood in a public place and had to swallow a pain so big it nearly took your knees out, this story is for you. Stay with us, because Naomi doesn't just survive this, she inherits it. The International Arrivals Hall at Hartsfield-Jackson smelled the way it always did. Recycled air, the ghost of someone's fast food, and that particular metallic sweetness that lives in airports at midday when the morning rush has passed but the afternoon wave hasn't hit yet. It was the smell of returning, of almost home. Naomi had been gone for 9 days. 9 days at the Serenade Wellness Retreat 2 states away, her doctor's. Suggestion, not her own. You're 28 weeks along, blood pressure creeping, you need stillness. So she had gone. She had packed her lilac coat because Isaac once told her she looked like something soft and beautiful when she wore it. She had packed the sonogram, the one where you could finally see the baby's nose, because she wanted to show the midwife there. She had left on a Tuesday. She was supposed to be back on Sunday. It was Friday. She had come home early to surprise him. She had been smiling since the gate. Her suitcase was the champagne-colored carry-on she bought the year they got married, the one with a small silver tag on the zipper engraved with her initials, N.H., a wedding gift from her father. She had rolled it down the jet bridge, through the terminal, past the coffee stand that always had a line, already picturing Isaac's face when he opened the door and saw her. She stepped into the main hall and immediately looked for signs to ground, transportation, and that was when she heard it, his laugh. She would know it anywhere, that particular open-throated laugh he reserved for joy he couldn't contain, the laugh from their wedding video, from the morning she told him she was pregnant, from the weekend they spent in Savannah 2 years ago before everything got complicated. She turned toward it the way you turn toward your own name, and there he was. Isaac, her husband. In a charcoal suit she'd never seen before, sharp, expensive, the kind he wore when he wanted to be looked at. His shoulders were back. His face was lit up like a man who had just walked out of the best meeting of his life. He looked good. He looked free. He looked like a man with absolutely no weight on him, because Latasha was already running, already crossing the floor toward him in a mustard yellow coat, her long braids swinging, her arms open before she'd fully reached him, moving the way a woman moves when she is completely certain of her welcome. No hesitation, no performance. Just the clean, uncomplicated motion of someone coming home to a man who had been waiting. Isaac caught her, both arms. He lifted her completely off the ground, her legs wrapping around him, her heels leaving the floor, and he held her there, spinning once, laughing that laugh, and the whole terrible thing lasted no more than 5 seconds, but it stretched out the way catastrophic things always do, slow and enormous, the way a building doesn't fall all at once but comes apart floor by floor. Naomi's hand found her belly. She didn't decide to do it. Her body just knew. She stood completely still while the arrivals hall moved around her, A mother with a stroller, a businessman barking into his phone, two teenagers arguing over a luggage cart. The whole world kept its momentum. Only Naomi had stopped. One tear broke loose. Just one. It ran the full length of her cheek and dropped, and she did not wipe it, did not move, did not make a single sound. She just watched her husband set another woman down and guide her toward the exit with his hand on the small of her back, their heads already tilting toward each other, already speaking in the private language of people who have been sharing secrets for a long time. In her coat pocket, the sonogram pressed gently against her thumb. She had folded it carefully that morning in the hotel room, twice along the crease so the baby's face stayed protected, and slipped it into her left pocket where she could feel the edge of it whenever she needed to. She had been reaching for it the whole flight. She had wanted to give it to Isaac. She had wanted to watch his face when she pulled it out. She had wanted to give him back the feeling of something good. Her knees began to go soft. She reached for her suitcase handle and her grip missed, and she tilted forward, just slightly, just enough, and a hand closed around her elbow from behind, firm, certain, the grip of someone who had been standing there long enough to be ready for exactly this. Your father wouldn't want you to fall. She turned. The man from the pillar was right beside her now. Up close, he was even more still than he had appeared from a distance, the kind of stillness that isn't passive but chosen, the stillness of someone who has decided that the world moves around him rather than the other way around. He was Korean, mid-40s, with slicked-back black hair and a high-collared suit so precisely fitted it looked like architecture. His eyes were dark and completely calm. Not kind, exactly, not cold either. Something in between, the eyes of a man who had already absorbed every possible outcome and found none of them surprising. He was not looking at Isaac. He had not looked at Isaac once. "Who are you?" Naomi said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Someone your father trusted," the man said. "My name is Kenzo." He released her elbow with the same deliberate precision with which he had taken it. "Go home now, not to surprise him, just to see." Then he stepped back, and the crowd between them thickened, and by the time Naomi turned fully around, he was gone, absorbed back into the terminal the way a shadow disappears when the light shifts. She stood there for another moment, then she picked up her suitcase handle. This time her grip found it, and she walked toward the exit. She used her key. That was the part she kept returning to later, in the weeks that followed. She had used her own key to enter her own house, and what she found inside had been arranged by a man who believed she was 2 states away, who had no reason to be careful, who had done everything in plain sight because he thought the audience was gone. Isaac's car was not in the driveway. He was still at the airport, probably taking Latasha to dinner, probably laughing that laugh. The house smelled different, not wrong exactly, just rearranged. A different perfume under. The familiar smell of their home, something heavier and more insistent, layered over the candles she kept in the entryway, and the cedar of the closet, and the particular warmth of a house that had been lived in all day without her. She set her suitcase down quietly. She walked through the entryway, past the console table where their wedding photo sat. Isaac in his suit, Naomi in her dress, both of them laughing at something the photographer had said. And down the hall. The guest room door was open. She stopped in the doorway. The room that had been empty 3 weeks ago, cream walls, a neutral duvet, the spare lamp she kept meaning to replace, had been settled into. A mustard yellow coat hung on the back of the door. Skincare lined up on the dresser with the particular organization of someone marking territory. A travel bag on the ottoman, unzipped, comfortable. An extra phone charger coiled on the nightstand. This was not a visit. This was installation. Naomi stood in the doorway for a long time. She didn't touch anything. She cataloged it all, the way her father had once told her to catalog a room when she was a girl. Look at everything once, carefully, and then you will never need to look again. And then she walked to their bedroom, hung her lilac coat on her side of the closet, and lay down on top of the covers with her eyes open. She did not cry again. She was already thinking. An hour later, she heard Isaac's key in the front door. She closed her eyes. She heard him come down the hall, heard his footsteps slow outside the bedroom door, the half-second hesitation of a man registering something unexpected. And then the door opened. Naomi. His voice was warm, immediate, practiced. "Baby, when did you get back?" She opened her eyes and gave him the smile of a woman who had come home, tired and grateful and completely unsuspecting. "This afternoon," she said. "The retreat ended early. I missed you." He crossed the room and kissed her forehead and held her, and his hands were steady, and his voice was soft, and he had always been an excellent liar. She was counting on that now. "The guest room," she said, settling back against the pillow. "I noticed a coat on the door." One breath. She counted it. "Oh, that's Maya's. She came through for a conference last week, needed a place to stay. She left some things. I keep meaning to text her." Maya. The name was immediate, specific. He had prepared it. "Of course," Naomi said, and she smiled again, and she asked him what was for dinner. The address Kenzo's driver texted her the following morning led to a townhouse on a quiet block on the east side of the city, the kind of street where nothing announces itself, no signs, no visible security, just a black door, a brass number, and a man in a dark jacket standing on the steps who nodded when her car pulled up, as though he had been expecting her for years. Inside, the house was spare and deliberate. Dark wood, low light, a table in the main room with 2 chairs and a glass of water already poured at the one facing the door. Kenzo was seated at the other. He stood when she entered, which surprised her, and gestured to the chair. On the table between them was a ledger. Black cover, no label. The edges worn soft from handling, the spine cracked with use. The kind of object that had been opened and closed thousands of times by hands that knew exactly what they were looking for. "Your father's name was Richard Osei Mensah," Kenzo said. Not a question. "You knew him as a real estate developer, generous, quiet, a man who worked hard and asked for nothing." Naomi said nothing. She was watching his hands on the ledger. "He was also the founding silent partner of an infrastructure that now spans 11 countries. Kenzo slid the ledger across the table. "Private security, asset management, strategic intervention. The work has other names in other rooms, but that is the architecture of it." She didn't reach for the ledger immediately. "He never told me. He kept you clean by design. He wanted you to choose the life you wanted." Kenzo's expression didn't change. "You chose Isaac Beaumont. The name landed differently now than it ever had before. Isaac came to your father through a referral 9 years ago," Kenzo continued. "He was promising, ambitious. Your father introduced him to the right rooms, and the right rooms opened doors, and Isaac walked through all of them and told himself he had built the path himself." A pause. "He never knew who held the door," Naomi leaned forward. "And you're telling me this now because Isaac has been attempting to access your family's asset architecture for the past 4 months, Kenzo said, "and because Latasha did not find him by accident." She went very still. "She was placed," Kenzo said. "Her assignment was to get close enough to Isaac to extract the access codes to your father's estate. She's been working him for 14 months. He paused. "Isaac believes it is a love affair." The room held its silence for a moment. "Who sent her?" Naomi asked. Something shifted in Kenzo's expression, just slightly. A tightening at the corner of his mouth that she would learn, over time, was the closest he came to showing that a question had impressed him. "A rival organization," he said. "One that has been watching your family's holdings since before your father became ill." Naomi opened the ledger. The pages were dense, columns of numbers, names she didn't recognize, dates going back nearly 2 decades, and there, threaded through it all in her father's small, precise handwriting, annotations she had never been meant to see. But at the very back, in a section tabbed with a red marker, she found a newer set of entries. Recent. The last one dated 4 months ago, while her father was still alive, barely, in the hospital bed she had sat beside every day for 6 weeks. Her name was in every line of that section. N. Beaumont, née Osei Mensah, sole inheritor, full succession. She looked up. He knew he was dying. Yes. And he didn't tell me any of this. "He told me," Kenzo said, "and he asked me to wait until you needed to know." He held her gaze. "You needed to know." She closed the ledger. She pressed her palm flat against the cover, and she felt the full weight of it, not just the paper, but everything underneath. "He thinks I'm still being the wife," she said finally. "Yes." "Good," she said. "Then I'd like to go home." She walked back through her own front door at 3 in the afternoon, and she smiled. That was the hardest part, and also the most important part. The smile. It had to be exactly right. Soft, tired, a little apologetic. The smile of a woman who had spent the morning at a prenatal appointment and was now grateful for a quiet house. She spent the next 3 days being exactly the woman Isaac believed she was. Soft, grateful, pleasantly distracted by her pregnancy. She brought him coffee in the morning. She laughed at his stories. She asked small questions about his work with wide, attentive eyes. She went to bed early, and she lay in the dark with her phone face down on her chest, listening. She listened to him move through the house at midnight, listened to the particular silence outside the guest room door, listened to the sounds of a man who believed he was operating without an audience. On day 2, she found the wire transfer drafts on his laptop. She had known his password for 6 years, and he had never once thought to change it, which told her everything she needed to know about how he truly saw her. She photographed each page methodically, the way her father had once taught her to catalog a room. On day 3, she found something more useful. Latasha's real name, not the name Isaac used for her. The other one, the name attached to a separate email account on a burner phone she located inside a jacket pocket in the back of the guest room closet. She photographed that too. That evening, she sat across from Isaac at the dinner table he had set with candles. "For you, baby, you deserve something nice." And she ate her food and listened to him talk about his upcoming gala, and watched his eyes fill with the particular pride of a man who believes he has built something that belongs to him. She listened to every word, and she thought about the ledger, and she smiled, just once, at exactly the right moment, and Isaac smiled back, and neither of them meant the same thing by it. It was Isaac who noticed the SUV first. He mentioned it on a Thursday morning, casually, the way men mention things they want to seem unbothered by. He set his coffee down and looked out the kitchen window at the street below, and said, almost to himself, that the same car had been parked outside 3 days in a row. Naomi was at the counter slicing fruit. She didn't turn around. "Probably a neighbor's guest," she said. "It's not the same. Spot each time," he said. "It moves." She placed a piece of mango in her mouth and turned to face him with the easy expression of a woman whose mind was entirely elsewhere. "Isaac, I'm almost 30 weeks pregnant. I genuinely do not have the bandwidth for a parking conspiracy right now." He almost smiled. Almost. She watched him make the decision to let it go, watched the quiet war between his suspicion and his arrogance, and watched arrogance win, the way it always did with Isaac, and he picked up his coffee and went back to his phone. She looked out the window. The black SUV was there. Third space from the corner, the driver invisible behind tinted glass as instructed. She had asked Kenzo for discretion, and he had given her something slightly more precise, visible enough that he feels watched, invisible enough that he cannot act on it. A man under surveillance makes mistakes. A man who makes mistakes leaves evidence. He was right. Isaac had already made 3 calls from his personal cell to board members in the past week, calls that were now logged. He had begun moving files on the shared home server to a password-protected folder, which told her exactly which files he was trying to hide. Pressure, applied quietly, produces clarity. She finished her mango. "Are you nervous about something, baby?" she asked. He looked at her. "No," he said. "Why would I be nervous?" "I don't know." Her hand drifted to her belly in the way that always softened him. "You just seem a little tense this week." He crossed the kitchen and kissed her forehead and told her not to worry. His hand rested on her shoulder for exactly as long as it needed to. She waited until she heard the front door close. Then she picked up her phone and sent one message to a number saved under no name. Day 8. He's rattled. Proceed. The credit lines came down on a Tuesday. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, just a quiet sequence of administrative decisions routed through holding companies that traced back to entities that traced back to her father's estate. All of it perfectly legal, all of it perfectly invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. Isaac did not know where to look. He had spent 9 years believing he had built his career on talent and instinct alone, never understanding that the foundation beneath his feet had been quietly laid by someone else entirely. The first sign was a declined card at a client lunch, which his assistant covered without comment, but which was noted. The second was an overdraft flag on the business account he used for the Meridian merger, which surfaced in a routine board report by Wednesday morning. By Thursday, his lead investor had called twice without leaving a voicemail. In Naomi's experience of watching her father navigate rooms like these, a held voicemail was the financial equivalent of a held breath. She heard Isaac in the study at 11 that night, door closed, voice controlled, the particular careful calm of a man working very hard not to sound afraid. She stood in the hallway outside with her glass of water and listened. It's a processing issue, he was saying. It will be resolved by Friday. A pause. I understand that, Marcus. I understand. Friday. She walked back to the bedroom and climbed into bed and thought about her father, about the way he had always said, the most powerful move is the one that looks like an accident. Never let them know you've thrown the punch. By the time they feel it, you should already be somewhere else. She was somewhere else. She was in her own bed reading a book about infant sleep schedules when Isaac came in at midnight with dark circles and loose shoulders. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Fine," he said. "Just work stuff." She nodded and turned the page. She was asleep, genuinely, peacefully asleep, before he was. He came to her on a Saturday. She was in the living room with her feet up in a cup of tea when Isaac walked in, closed the door behind him, and stood in the middle of the room with his hands in his pockets and the expression of a man who had rehearsed something and was now deciding if the rehearsal was enough. "There's something I need to talk to you about," he said. "Okay," she said. He sat down across from her, elbows on his knees, the posture of false intimacy, and he said very carefully that with her father having passed and the estate in the process of being transferred, he had been speaking with the family solicitor about the most efficient way to consolidate the assets, the house on Meridian Drive specifically. It would make sense, from a tax perspective, for her to sign a transfer of administration over to the business umbrella he was restructuring. He slid a folder across the coffee table. She looked at it. She did not touch it. "The solicitor," she said slowly. "Which solicitor?" "Patterson, the one your father used for the residential properties." "Patterson retired in February," she said, "right after the funeral." She watched something move behind his eyes. "I hired new representation in March. I thought I'd mentioned that." He held her gaze for 2 full seconds. "You can still sign this version," he said. His voice had shifted, just a degree or two in the direction of something harder. "It's straightforward, Naomi. The house is sitting empty. It makes sense to—" She laughed. It came out genuine, which surprised even her. Not a performance, not a weapon, just the clean, uncomplicated sound of a woman who has finally understood the full shape of something she'd been looking at sideways for years. She laughed, and then she looked at him and felt, for just a moment, something almost like pity. "Isaac," she said when she had collected herself, "the house on Meridian Drive sits on 4 acres of land that borders the eastern edge of my father's private holdings. The residential deed is attached to 17 secondary instruments that together form the access. Architecture for an asset portfolio worth," she tilted her head slightly, "considerably more than a house." He went very still. "My legal team has been reviewing the full estate for 6 weeks," she said. "Would you like to know what they found?" He stood up. He was taller than her when she was seated, and he used that now, the way men do when an argument starts going wrong. His voice dropped to something he clearly expected her to find difficult to manage. "Naomi, sign the papers." She looked up at him from the couch, feet still resting on the ottoman, tea still steaming, hand resting quietly on her belly. "No," she said, simply, completely. He stared at her. She held his gaze without any expression at all, and after 5 seconds, she counted them, he picked up the folder and walked out of the room. She heard the front door, the sound of his car pulling away. She reached for her tea. She sent one message. He made his move. "We're ready. Confirm the gala plan. The Grandview Ballroom held 400 people, and on the night of Isaac's Meridian merger gala, it was exactly that full. Investors, developers, board members, and the particular species of person who attends these events purely to be seen attending. Crystal light, champagne, and the low roar of people performing success at each other. Isaac arrived at 7 and worked the room the way he always had. Handshake, laugh, name remembered, favor implied, moving through it like a man who had built it. His speech was scheduled for 9. The announcement of the merger, the new capital, the restructured board, the night he had been planning for 8 months. Naomi arrived at 8:45. She wore black. Not lilac, not soft, not the palette of a woman asking to be handled gently. Black, structured, a wrap dress that acknowledged her pregnancy without apologizing for it. Her hair pulled back from her face in a way that left nothing open to interpretation. Her father had told her, once, very quietly, that the most important thing about entering a room of powerful people was never to arrive uncertain. Walk in like you already know what you own. She walked in like that. Kenzo was beside her, 1 step behind and to her right, hands clasped in front of him, expression completely still. Behind him, 2 members of his security detail stayed close but unobtrusive. The room didn't erupt. Rooms like this are too practiced for eruption, but it shifted. That particular atmospheric change when a new variable enters an equation, people thought they had solved. She watched it move through the crowd like a current. The double takes, the heads turning. The 2 investors near the bar who had been scheduled to sign with Isaac's restructured company, now looking at Kenzo with the immediate, unambiguous recognition of men who knew exactly who he was and exactly what his presence in a room meant. Isaac saw her from across the ballroom. She watched the color leave his face. She crossed the room toward the presentation display, the merger documents, the architectural renderings, the glossy materials Isaac had spent weeks preparing, and she set a folder down beside it. Black cover, worn soft at the edges, her father's ledger. And beside it, a new set of documents, fresh, clean, bearing the letterhead of her legal team. The investors reached her before Isaac did. Of course they did. They were people who moved toward information. She answered 3 questions in the time it took Isaac to cross the ballroom, and by the time he reached her, both men had already stepped back with the body language of people quietly withdrawing from a burning building. "What are you doing?" Isaac said, low, the last version of composed he had left. "Signing," she said. She picked up the pen and signed the top document with her full name, Naomi Adiz Osei Menza Beaumont, in the signature she had practiced at 17 when her father made her learn to write. It as though it would matter someday. It mattered today. "These are transfer documents," she said, moving to the next page. "They redirect all assets held under the Beaumont business umbrella back to the Osei Mensa estate, which I administer. The Meridian merger doesn't dissolve. It simply moves under different ownership." She signed. "Your name is not on the new structure." "Naomi, the investors you have been courting for 8 months," she said without looking up, "were approached through shell instruments owned by my family's holdings. They were always mine. They were always waiting to see whether you were worth keeping." She looked up at him. His jaw was tight. His hands at his sides were very still. Behind Naomi, Kenzo had not spoken, had not needed to. His presence alone had restructured the geometry of the room. "You are not," she said quietly, "not cruelty. Just the plain delivery of a concluded assessment. Worth keeping." She signed the final page. She handed the pen to her attorney, picked up the ledger, and walked away from the table. The speech never happened. Naomi thought about her father, about the ledger, about the annotations in his small, precise handwriting, about the 6 weeks she had sat beside his hospital bed, holding his hand while he looked at her with eyes that were already somewhere ahead of the present moment, already calculating, even then, the distance between where she was and where she would need to be. He had known. He had left her everything and said nothing, because he had known that the version of her who could hold it, who could walk into a room like that, sign those papers with that name, and stand here right now without flinching, that version of her could only be built by living through exactly what she had just lived through. She wasn't sure she forgave him for that. She thought she might, eventually. The baby moved again. A slow, deliberate shift, an elbow, maybe, pressing outward as if to remind Naomi that she was not alone in this body, had not been alone for months, would not be alone going forward. "I know," Naomi said softly. To her, to the city, to no one in particular. She stood on the balcony at 2 a.m. The city was spread out below her in its nighttime grammar, lights and distance and the low hum of something always moving, always in progress. The air was cool, and she had a blanket around her shoulders and one hand resting on her belly where the baby had been awake for the past hour, turning slow, restless circles. Her attorney had called to confirm Isaac had left the gala within 20 minutes of her departure. Every document was filed, every asset redirected, everything her father had spent decades building returned to the name it had always belonged to. Kenzo had sent a single line by text. Latasha's handlers recalled her once the merger documents were filed. There was nothing left for them to extract. She was on a flight by midnight, gone, the way a piece that has served its purpose disappears from the board. She reached into her coat pocket. The sonogram was still there, folded twice along the crease, the baby's face protected. She had carried it through 9 days, through an airport, through a house full of lies, through a ballroom full of powerful people who had underestimated her. She unfolded it carefully, held it up to the city light, and for the first time since Gate B24, she smiled. Not the careful, weaponized smile she'd worn for 10 days, but the real one, the one she'd been saving. She pulled the blanket tighter and stood there a while longer, looking out over everything that was hers. If this story moved something in you, if you've ever had to go quiet before you could go powerful, like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Tell us, at what moment did you know Naomi had already won? We read every single one. And if you want to see what happens when she takes her seat at the head of that table, the next story is already waiting for you.